Welcome to WGSN-DB, Going Solo. This is a senior citizens forum sponsored by Benefits for You Too Insurance Services. And I'm Janice Wood, your host. And at Benefits You Too Insurance Services, they specialize in health insurance for people with certain disabilities and for people that are 65 and above. They have Medicare supplemental plans, Medicare Advantage plans, and prescription drug plans. But today, my guest is Laura Lin.
Hi, how are you?
Everyone. And we are going to be talking about probate. In previous shows I've had, we've talked about wills and trusts, but now we're going to talk about what if you don't have that trust? What if you don't have a will, or you do have a will? What happens? Okay. And why, and this is going to lead into why that trust is so important to have. And why, and one of the things I always want to talk about, why I think having a will and trust is such a special gift that you can leave your family. Okay. So Laura Lin has been a lawyer since 2006.
Yeah.
She's licensed in both New York State and the state of California. And one of the things that she has told me in our conversation, doesn't matter what state you're in, the laws can be different from one state to the next.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the basically the process is pretty much the same across the states, but the laws are different. So regardless, it's going to be pretty time consuming for the most part and expensive.
Very expensive. And there's time frames that you have to go through that you don't know. So I've talked to people and they've said to me, well, let my children worry about it. I don't have to worry about it.
Not a good idea.
That's why I said, and I'll say it again throughout this is one of the best gifts that you can leave your family, is to have all your assets, even if you don't own a home, which we'll talk about later on, even if you don't own property, you still can have other assets.
Yes.
That add up.
Yes.
Okay. Or you may want to have to do something with that loved animal.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Laura, tell us, what is a probate and why is this so hard to go through?
Okay. So probate, there's a lot of steps to probate. And when somebody first comes in, there's some fact finding that you want to do. As far as, who, okay, say mom passed away, right?
Yeah.
Who is the survivor, right? Is there a spouse? Is there children? And what type of assets do they have? And then does it need to go through probate, right? So if there is assets, because some things don't need to go through probate, obviously if they have a trust, right, then that is avoiding the probate process. So let's assume that we have assets that do need to go through the probate process. We're going to have to file a petition. And, basically probate in a nutshell is just the court is having to monitor the estate so that the assets are distributed to the people who, the descendant wanted them to go to.
So that doesn't also mean that that you're protecting the person who's passed away to make sure that if they owed anybody, that their debts are paid for.
Right. Yes. So we're making sure. So basically they're making sure that the descendants' wishes are being carried out.
Right.
So usually if there's a will or not a will, either way, even if there's a will, it still has to go through probate, right? So if there's a will, they'll usually name who that executor or the administrator, depending on what state you're in, they call it something different. That's a person who's in charge, right? The family member, maybe the son or the daughter or whoever, the spouse. But then how do they want those assets distributed? And before you can distribute any assets, you have to pay all the creditors, right? But there's a lot of steps in between there. So usually it's filing a petition with the court. And when you file the petition with the court, if there's a will, you have to submit the will. And that right there, each step of the way, there could be issues. And So for instance, when you submit the will, is that will valid is going to be one of the questions that the judge is going to look at. And I'm going to say like Aretha Franklin, for instance, that was one of the issues that her family was tied up in court for like 4 or 5 years, multi-million-dollar estate, right? But what happened with her was they didn't think that she died, I think in 2018. They didn't think she had a will, right? So they thought, oh, okay.
Oh, like there was something written in a couch note or something with it. Yeah.
So if you don't have a will, then there's state laws that say who gets what, right? And so they thought, okay, there's no will, the 4 sons are going to inherit. Well, then when they were going through her house, they found 2 wills. They found one locked in a cabinet that she wrote in her hand. She signed each page, she had it notarized. Then they found one in her couch that was like on a spiral notebook that she just wrote it up, right? So then they said distribution differently. So the kids who would benefit more from the one in the locked cabinet, which was dated, I think 2010 or 2012, they were trying to say that one's valid. Look, you know, it was signed, it was notarized, it was locked up. Well, the one in the couch, they're like, you know, the people who were benefiting more from that were saying this was dated later. It was the most recent. It was dated in 2014. Right. So which one's valid? You don't know. It had to go through court. It took years. And then they found out that was the one that was valid. Doesn't matter if it's on a napkin. Doesn't matter if it's on a spiral notebook. That was the one that was valid. But again, so many different things along the way can go wrong, especially because you have a lot of people involved. You have people inheriting money. You have emotions.
Oh, the emotional.
A lot of stuff each step of the way. So, you know, probate court, then you have to petition the court. So you get in there and you're basically opening up a probate before that even first court date of filing the petition. You have to notify everybody who's in the will. You have to notify anybody who would inherit if there wasn't a will. And some states you have to also give them a copy of the will. So, to allow them to say, no, that's not the valid will, or, you know, no, I don't want her to be executor. So again, there's things that can go wrong right from the very beginning.
It's such an emotional time.
Absolutely.
It's an emotional time because when you lost your loved one, or you may be happy that they're gone. I mean, just there's all types. There's all types.
And she said that on TV.
Right, I said that on TV. Well, you don't know. You don't know.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
But the thing is that if there's money involved, may it be $100, or may it be a $100 picture that you all love, or a ring, if it's written down and you say where it wants to go, it's so important.
Right.
And it's just, and you don't know when people start arguing.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a thing too, is one of the first things that when somebody passes away, you want to secure the assets. So, I mean, I've heard so many horror stories, and I'm sure you have too, where mom passed away. You know, she went in for surgery. They didn't know she was going to pass away. She told one of the, you know, children, oh, I have some of your money, thousands and thousands of dollars, told her where it was. They didn't think she was going to pass away, has the surgery. She dies Sunday morning, 8 o'clock. Everybody's informed. They all meet at the house. By 10 o'clock, that money's gone. Somebody already went in and stole the money. There's a lot of times when people go in, they take things like immediately. You don't think it's going to happen to your family. Everybody thinks, oh, not my family. Yes, your family, everybody's family. It always happens. We had it where caregivers, you know, in that time, because again, somebody passes away. You're not thinking, let's go secure the assets right away. You need to secure the assets right away.
Yeah.
Because people steal. People have stolen lots of things.
You mentioned caregiver earlier when we were talking before the show about a caregiver who tore up a will.
Because she was angry. She wasn't even related, but angry that she didn't inherit something, and tore up the will thinking, oh, I'll, you know, stick it to them, right? You know, the family, because she didn't like who was inheriting it. That could have caused huge problems, because then you don't have a valid will. And then you have to prove, either get a copy, even a copy might not necessarily work. You have to prove that the person didn't intentionally rip it up, like meaning the person deceased.
So does that will have to be a hard copy, or can you take it and put it on a computer? Will they recognize that type of thing?
It's got to be an original will. So there's different kinds of wills. You can have what they call, not every state allows what they call a holographic will. That's what Aretha Franklin had, where
Right.
she wrote it out all in her handwriting.
Right.
And it had the date, it had her intentions, this is my will, it was signed and stuff. So if it meets certain criteria, some states allow that holographic, just one signature, but each state has their particular requirements of what's acceptable in a will. So usually it's the date, there's usually got to be two witnesses, it's got to say it's your will, it's got to say certain things in it. And that's why that first court appearance is it even a valid will? If it's not a valid will, or there isn't a will, then it goes by state law. So in other words, your assets are going to go to who the state says, usually spouse, children, parents, sibling,
Yeah.
something of that sort of structure.
Well, I know this is 40 years ago, and I know laws have changed since 40 some years ago. Okay. Doesn't matter what state in those states the laws are always changing. Okay. My father didn't have a will, but he didn't have a will, didn't have a trust. He didn't own property, which everybody says if you have property, you need to have a will and a trust. Okay. But he didn't have any property, but there were still assets. And we still went through
Probate. Yeah.
Which took 2 years.
Yeah.
And by the time we got through, the lawyers were getting the money.
Absolutely. And that's usually what happens is it's very time consuming and very costly. Because again, there's like a lot of steps involved. Even after you get that petition, finally you go to court. And then if the court says, yes, you can be executor, and you get those letters, which is basically kind of, your ticket to be able to administer the estate. That's when the steps are just beginning, right? Now you've got the authority to go and get the assets and do what you need to do. Like usually you have to inventory the assets. You have to notify creditors and let them know, that we're administering the estate. And then you have to figure out, is this, you have to give the creditors a certain period of time to respond and say, is this a valid claim or not? Lots of responsibility there.
Okay. So with probate, sometimes you have to go to court itself.
Yeah, you have to go to court hearing. So usually in the very beginning, the very first, when you're opening the probate court, you're filing a petition and you're actually going to a court because you want to make sure, again, if the will is valid or not, and then who's going to be executor. Once the court approves the executor, then they send letters, which is basically your order saying that, yes, I'm executor, I can administer this estate. So then you have the authority. There's different kinds of authority. It gets very complicated. I don't want to get in the weeds, but there's different, do they have full authority? Do they have limited authority? Do they have no authority? Meaning, does everything have to be stamped, approved by the court? So once you get those letters, that's when you start, okay, now I can start administering this estate. Now I have some authority to do something. So now is when, you look at the assets. All the assets have to be appraised. So any assets of value, I should say. So real estate, you have to have, in California, we have what they call a probate referee, which is basically an appraiser that's appointed by the court. And that appraiser has to say, what was the value of that house at the date of death? What was the value of that car date of death? All those big assets have to be appraised. That can get a little tricky sometimes. Like if you have like a business, like a closely held business, or different music, Prince's estate was in litigation for years because of valuation. Some things are hard to, a house is easier to evaluate, right? An appraiser can go in and say, this is what the market value is. But when you start getting into unique artwork and different things, it's really hard to do that valuation. So that's what led Prince's estate into a lot of litigation, especially when the IRS is involved. They want their money.
The IRS always wants their money.
It's valued up here, and you're saying, no, over here. Yeah, no, they want their.
I just had a friend that went through that. Her father passed away, but her mother was still alive, and they had to go and find out the value of the house when he passed away.
Yes, that's hard, right? To go back. Yeah,
right.
There's a lot, and that has a lot to do too. In California, it's a little different than other states, but it has to do with capital gains taxes and step ups, and just a lot to do with taxes, property taxes as well. So yeah, there's a lot to go into it. Yeah.
So I don't may have been the way the title was on the property that they had to do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I was surprised when she was asking me about that, and I'm going, I don't know. But I don't want to get into how that property the title was done on that
Yeah.
property.
Yeah, title, property title, and again, that's, depends on how title's held. So that's one of the things when somebody passes away, and if you go to the attorney's office, that's one of the things they're gonna look at is how is this property titled? There's different state, like California is a community property state, but not a lot,
Yeah.
not every state is. So different things might trigger probate versus not probate,
Not
right?
probate,
So
yeah.
like if something in California is held, community property with rights of survivorship, what that means is one spouse dies, the other spouse just gets it. Or if it's joint tenancy, two people, one person dies, that other person, last man standing is what they say, gets the property, right? But if it's in common or something else, or if it's sold, one person held it. Yeah.
Right. So I know that's real important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also know we were just hearing a story, let's see if I can do the whole story correctly, where someone took care of their grandmother, okay? And the grandmother left her the property and all the assets. And the rest of the family was unhappy about it and they wanted to destroy that property. But there was a will and trust. And it really broke up the family even with the will and trust.
Yeah.
Because they didn't like the way that things are being distributed. Now I have a story where I had a great aunt who left certain amount of people, certain amounts of money. There was no property, but there was a lot of money. Okay.
Yeah.
So she left, like my sons got part of the portion, and then some other cousins got the money, but I had my two nephews and niece received nothing. Okay. Well, my mother went to court to protest the will and the trust.
Yeah.
And all the judge said to my mother is that you were a really good grandmother, but if I take any money away from anybody, I'm taking it from your other grandchildren.
Right.
I'm not taking for that. But this is not what this person wanted.
Yes.
They wanted it to go to these two people versus these three people.
Yeah.
And she backed down.
Yeah. Well,
but she did go to the court.
Yeah, to try. And that's the thing is sometimes it's just a lot of times like it just in law in general, there's what we call a gray area, right?
Yeah.
So things aren't necessarily always black and white, right? Like you cut and dry, right? So sometimes you might look at a will and they might have said it was valid, right? So the court gives you your orders and then you go into probate the estate. But then you're reading it and it's like, okay, I give my daughter this house because she lives in it with me. And then they sell that house and she buys another house and then they live in that one. Well, did they intend for that second house to be given because they sold the first one and she's still living? So sometimes it's great. Was that the intent or not? And sometimes they do have to go to court just to kind of hash out those things because it's not necessarily clear.
It's not really clear.
Yeah.
And people argue over things.
Yeah. So, absolutely. And going to your point, as far as people, people take things, people argue, and people's feelings are hurt. I mean, you've got a lot of emotion going on. People, a lot of times it's also too, it stems from years and years, childhood, she got the green bike and I got the yellow bike and I wanted the green bike. And, from way back when they were kids, they're mad about something way long time ago. But there's a lot of emotions that come through, when parents die or both parents die. Or somebody just in general, yeah.
Okay, we have to hear a little commercial break from our sponsors, so we'll be back with you.
At Benefits for You Too Insurance Services, we believe knowledge is power when it comes to selecting the correct healthcare and Medicare insurance. Please contact us at healthcareoptions@benefitsforyou2.com or call us at 310-245-0332.
Hi, welcome back to WGSN-DB, Going Solo. This is a Senior Citizens Forum. And my guest today is Laura Lin, and we've been talking about the exciting probate. And it only becomes exciting when you have to go through it. It's not exciting if you don't have to go through it. And we're talking about what happens when you do go through it, and how it can tear apart your family or your friends, And,
Absolutely.
okay,
So kind of going to what we were talking about before. So one of the things that you want to do, unfortunately, but this is the reality of life, is secure your house, or the house, right? Secure all the assets, especially if you're the executor of the estate, because you're responsible. You have responsibility there.
now I had someone say to me, my house is homesteaded, so I don't have to worry about all that. Does homesteading, again, I know it's gonna depend upon the
It's
state,
going to depend on the state and the situation. So I
Right.
think that I would kind of leave that for like a whole different conversation.
it's a different, okay,
Yeah, I would say that it depends a lot.
It
And that's
depends.
a lot, that's the common lawyer response is it depends. So,
okay, it
Yeah.
depends.
yeah,
So you should look into it if you have your house homesteaded in the state that you live, if it's gonna be protected from going through probate, if you do not have a trust set up.
right. Yes, because different states, again, have different laws and what you can do and to keep things from probate and different things you can do with the title and just, there's a lot of different things that you can and you can't do. And so, yeah, it's very state specific as far as what's allowed and what works and what doesn't.
Mm.
So some things that might work in one state might not necessarily work in another.
Yeah, that's what's very complicated
Yeah,
about this.
yeah.
And then it's complicated within the state.
Yeah, exactly. Because like,
Yeah.
for instance, Florida frequently uses, they call them ladybirds, where you can put your house into, do kind of a payable on death with a deed and stuff like that. That works very well from what I understand. I don't work in Florida.
Well,
but
I did
different
a
states-
little bit with that. I remember my brother and sister-in-law were selling their house
Mhm.
and everything went through a lawyer.
Yeah,
Okay, where in other states, especially California, I know California, where you don't go through a lawyer to sell a house.
right.
So that's
Yeah.
probably,
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, yeah. And again, different states, even within a state, there's different county rules, local rules is what they call them. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
you just have to kind of be careful as far as, again, so that's why a lot of times, can you do probate by yourself? You can try, and I'm not saying you can't. But it is a lot of work and it's a lot of forms and knowing, and there's a lot of timelines, like you were saying in the very beginning. So once you get those papers, say you're executor, you have that authority. So you want to make sure you're securing all the assets, right? Because because you have responsibility now. You don't want anybody taking anything, but then you have to write and you have to submit to the court what they call like an inventory, which is basically what you have and then what's the value of those assets. So you have to submit that documentation to the court. So this is being watched, everything that you do.
that's a lot of work. So
Yeah.
even if you don't own property or you don't have a lot of money, but you may have accumulated things that are valuable. So things that are valuable could be jewelry,
Absolutely, yeah. Artwork,
artwork.
coins. Some people are coin collectors or stamp collectors.
Well, but even that television set
Yeah.
can be worth
Yeah.
something or the computer that you have can be worth something.
Absolutely, yeah.
Something,
Yeah.
even though you may not think it's, oh, well, it's my TV, I've had it for
Yeah.
25 years. But you don't know, you may be sitting there with an antique that has
Absolutely.
some form of value.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and the thing too is kind of going back into the beginning of the conversation when, say, a family member comes in and says, my mom passed away, what do I do? A lot of it too is looking at where do you think the value of the estate's going to be. Each state has each state's got different rules, but they have a different threshold of when does a full probate need to be going in versus maybe a summary probate or a quicker probate, So usually there's a threshold, but that varies. Like in California, it's like 184,000 roughly.
Right.
Another state it might be 50, another state it might be 10. So it all depends. So you might not think that, oh, I don't have that much, but you really probably do, more than you think.
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
I also know that from experience, and my mother had a will and a trust, but I also had to go back in as one of the executors because I shared that
Mhm.
with my brother, but we had to go back in with her bills. And it was like questioning the bills and stuff. It's just, you have to have that authority
Absolutely.
to do that. And some bills, if you don't give me a breakdown, I'm not going to pay for it.
Yeah. Well,
But this is going into one of my favorite subjects is, yeah, okay.
yeah.
So, but that's, it's if you're going through probate, you're gonna have to find out all of that out.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
it's not easy working with, say, if they're in a skilled nursing facility, getting that breakdown
Yeah,
and letting them tell, because like right now, and this is like a minor amount of money. I have a friend who I had medical power of attorney. I did not have financial power of attorney. And it was a shared with some other ladies.
Mhm.
And there's $400 that is outstanding and we can't get it back.
yeah.
There was no
Finan-
trust or will,
Yeah,
but we did have shared medical power of attorney.
Yeah.
Okay.
and when you're taking a case through probate, so that's one of the things. So you're inventorying all the assets, but then you're also saying, well, what debts are owed, right? So
Right.
you have to actually give notice to creditors and say, we're probating this estate.
Right.
Hey, if we owe you money, there's certain people that's mandated that you have to notify, like you have to notify in California, the state tax board, of course, right?
Mhm.
They want to make sure they get their money. The IRS wants to,
Yeah.
they want to make sure they get their money, but also too, like if Medi-Cal, right? Like Medicaid, they call it nationwide. It's different.
Yeah, it's
But-
Medi-Cal in the state of California.
California.
11 states for Medicaid
Yeah.
have their own name for it.
Yeah, so basically they have to be notified because, hey, if they were paying for long-term care and there's assets in the estate, then they're gonna want to, collect their money, right? So basically, everybody has to be notified as far as we're probating this estates. And then if these creditors want to claim, they have to file a claim. It's all got to go through the courts. And then
Right.
you as executor are the one who has to look at them. And depending on how much authority that you were given by the court, you can maybe either approve it or deny it, or you might have to submit each one to the court for approval,
Oh my God,
depending on
this is
how much
so
authority. Yeah, so you talk
time
about
consuming.
exactly. Now, some things, if it's like a house or something that has property attached to it, like they don't necessarily, you don't have to send them a claim or a notice because you have to pay that bill, right? There's a
Mhm,
mortgaged house or something like that. But when it comes to like credit cards and other things, you have to send out notice and then wait for a claim to come in and then either pay it or not. And that could be right there, could be kind of dicey, right? Do you pay this bill or don't you? A lot of it depends. How much money do we have in the account? Do we have enough
Right.
money to pay it?
And what are you
is
personally
it-
responsible for versus the deceased
Yeah.
individual?
Well, and usually you're like, I'm not responsible for my parents' debts, right? But as an executor, I am responsible to make sure
What's in
that
these?
is it valid, or did Aunt,
Well-
cousin Susie just send in a claim saying you owe me $20,000, no, that's not valid, I mean, maybe it is, but you'd have to verify that to
Yeah,
confirm before you just write a check to
And
somebody.
then I would always ask for a statement, a breakdown.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes, exactly. A bill, you want to look at
Right.
it, make sure it looks legitimate and everything like that. And then,
And what, even with a will and trust, you would still have to do some of that,
yeah,
but the authority for setting it up is already there. You don't have to go through probate to do that.
oh, yeah. And with a will, like, or if you're going through probate versus a trust, you could just do this, right?
Right.
When you're in probate court, you have to submit this stuff to the court. And sometimes you need court approval before you could even do something. So
Right.
there's a lot of different steps in there, right?
So-
There's notice that you have to give out and there's, yeah.
So if you have that trust, you don't have to go through that.
Not as much. You still have
Not
to go
as
through
much.
steps, but
Step-
not, it's
not
not
as much.
being watched by the courts like it is when you're in probate
Yeah.
court. Yeah.
Right. And right now, we've been talking about the time that's involved in all this.
Oh,
But let's
absolutely.
talk about the costs. So
Expensive.
not only is what you're going to be giving to the state, and each state is what the percentages are going to be different from one state to the next,
Right.
but what are the lawyers' costs and all of that?
So there's lots of costs here. So there's lawyers' fees. The executor could actually get paid as well.
Mhm.
We'll go through each one of these. And then there's, of course, all the court fees. So I'm going to talk about California, right? Because each state, again, is different. And each attorney, like if you go, if you're in New York and you're talking Manhattan versus, Albany or Buffalo, the prices are going to be different. Just like in California, the prices are going to vary a little bit. But just to give you guys a ballpark idea, in California, there's a statutory breakdown of what attorneys can charge and what the executor can charge. They both can charge the same amount, and they do it by percentages. So it starts off for the first 100,000, 4%, that's $4,000, right? The second 100,000, it's 3%. The next 800,000 is 2%, right? The next 9 million is 1%. So what does that mean? If the estate, I'm going to use round figures just to kind of make it easy. If the estate is worth $1 million, which in California, properties are
Mhm.
very expensive. So it's different than a lot of other states. If the estate's worth $1 million, doesn't matter if you owe $950,000 on the mortgage, right? If your estate, which includes your bank accounts, your IRAs, your everything that's in that probate is worth $1 million, roughly, approximately, in fees for attorney, $23,000. The executor can also get $23,000. Now we're up to $46,000. That's not including the filing fees for the court, which is usually $400 and something in California, and that's going to be at least a couple times, 2 or 3 times, right? The probate referee that we talked about, who has to appraise those assets, the appraiser, roughly like on $1 million, depends on what they have to evaluate.
250, I would think,
1,000. I just did a
yeah.
court case and it was about $1 million estate.
which is, well, if you live,
Roughly $1,000.
yeah,
in
for California, that's
appraiser
easy to
fees,
have
yeah.
happen.
So you can easily see $50,000. So usually they say rule of thumb, 5%, like $1 million, 50,000. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
Other states, yeah, like, again, it's going to vary, and it's going to depend on the size of the estate and the complexity of the estate,
Mhm.
right? What I just talked about, that's a smooth ride, right? We're not talking litigation and problems. If there starts to be circumstances where there's people arguing and litigation's involved, then you're talking a lot more money as well.
Okay, yeah. So we've given us some idea of what it costs to go through probate.
Yeah.
So just real quickly, what does it cost to have a trust done?
Now, and that's going to, again, vary, right?
It's going to vary
It's
because
gonna
nothing is
vary,
cookie cutter.
Right, it's going to vary on how much, well, first of all, how many things you need to get done. So usually, and I don't want to get too much, but usually you don't just get a trust. Usually you want to get the healthcare proxy, you want to get
Right.
so that you have somebody appointed as your healthcare agent. You want to have a will, you want to have a
Yeah.
power of attorney, like you were
Right.
talking about before, so somebody can help you if you're incapacitated and you need somebody to help you
Yeah,
with
but
the
they can-
finances. So, and then of course you want the trust. Trust, I say that's where the secret sauce is, and I don't want to, because you can do so much with a trust, right? And they can be very complicated or maybe not. So an easy trust or a more simple trust would be a single person. I want to give everything to my kids. They can just get an outright distribution once I pass away.
Yeah.
Nothing too major. I have one house, I have these accounts. You retitle them into the trust. That's one. But maybe something more complicated would be, husband and wife, they're on their second marriage. They each have children. They want to make sure those children
Well,
are taken care of. This one has a business, and then they have a joint business. It's a community
Okay,
property.
so-
You know what I'm trying to say?
Again, it's going to vary.
It's going to
But
vary.
it's never going to be as much.
It's not going to be $50,000, right?
Right.
No. So it's going to vary. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to depend on what you get, what type of those documents you need, and then how complicated they are. So usually what I recommend is most attorneys will talk to you at first, because they're going to, obviously you want to see if you're a good match and all of that, but then also too, to see how complicated it is, because somebody who's got multiple commercial properties or real estate or rentals or something like that.
Vary.
Yeah.
It's going to vary,
Yeah.
but it's not going to cost
It's
you
not gonna
what
cost-
it's going
no,
to cost you
no,
for probate.
Yeah.
That's why at the very beginning of the
Yeah.
show, I said, having a will and trust
Is
is the best
way.
gift you can give your children. And if you're limited on money, so you don't give them your family birthday presents
Yeah.
or Christmas presents or whatever holiday presents are. I would do that will and trust, because this is going to save your family so much headache.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't want to see people arguing.
I've seen families divided horribly, and I had a friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine,
Right.
and I used to always think, oh, she's got like the perfect family, right? I mean, they were just always so
Right.
nice. She was the youngest of like 6 kids, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
saw them on holidays, and they were always together and everything
Right.
else, right? Beautiful family. Father died, mother, started declining in health. It's all started because there was nobody appointed for healthcare agent, right? So one sister thought that the mother should stay home, but the other sisters thought, no, she should go into assisted living, because the concern being
Right.
the bedroom and everything was upstairs. it's not safe, the shower's upstairs,
Yeah.
So that just right there, if they had at least somebody appointed of who the decision maker was, then there would have been probably respect with what the decision was.
Right.
And that person hopefully would have at least talked to mom a little bit to find out. But that right there started a rift that divided till this day, 30 something years later, that family is divided 3 and 3 because everything had to go through the court system. And that it's what a shame, do you think that mom she would be rolling over?
And a lot of times people, that's why we do this show.
Yeah.
Is to inform you what's out there. And if you go back and you look at, I have some other shows that we've talked about, actually the will and trust, but we don't talk about probate, okay? Please go back and look at those shows because it's full of good information. Each show, you're gonna get something different out of, okay? Same thing, if she and I were to get back and talk about probate, we would have more information that we haven't even touched on today, okay? It's just so important that you are aware of what probate is and what decision you're making for the hardship of your family.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the will and trust, as Laura said, touches on other things about what do you want to happen with your health, okay? Who's responsible for making that information, all right? So there's just so much information. We could go on
I know.
forever and always.
I enjoy talking with you.
Right,
Thank
and
you.
this is, thank you so much for sharing with us what this important information to have. And I'm hoping it saves somebody some grief
hope
and
so.
aggravation, okay? And please come back and
Thank
visit
you.
us
I would
again.
love to.
So we
Thank
have-
you so much.
because I always have a good time. I loved it. So thank you very much. Thank you for watching us. This is WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, and this is a Senior Citizens Forum. Bye.